you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So Valerie, proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, a big part of the reason why we wanted to have you all together is to give an update on where we're at with the multifamily zoning requirement for the MBTA community. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint and sort of go through this in an efficient way and take any questions and kind of get a little bit of feedback from you all while we have you. So let me just pull that up.
So Val, we're skipping to 6, is that right?
This is number 4, the MBTA communities multifamily zoning.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's all right. Okay, so just a little bit of a recap on what the town needs to do. There was legislation passed in 2021 that every MBTA community has to have a multifamily housing district, zoning district. Ours has to be at least 50 acres. We have to have a capacity for at least 1,248 units. Half of that unit capacity has to be half mile of the train station. There has to be a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, and this all has to be in place by before the end of 2020 or 2024. Sorry about that. And the requirement is just that we've been advised by the AG's office that there's no opt-out for the requirement, and we have to do it. Otherwise, we would face civil enforcement action and liability under federal fair housing laws. And if you have a question, just use the raise hand or however you want to get my attention. You don't have to wait to the end. So to gauge community input on this and get a sense of where we should head, we put out an online survey. Hopefully you saw it and had the opportunity to participate. It was out for about 2 weeks, end of August into Labor Day. And we got a lot of responses for our surveys, over 500. And we got feedback on how the district should be shaped and where it should be located. Things such as height. How tall should we allow buildings to be? Not surprisingly, there was a preference for a 3-story maximum, which is typical in town. Open space, how much of that should we require on a lot? And the most popular vote was to keep it consistent at 20%. Same with setbacks, keeping those consistent with our other zoning districts. For parking, we asked a question about whether we could reduce the parking around the train stations. And the over 60% said that 1.5 spaces or less were per unit were appropriate within a half mile of the commuter rail. And then outside of that area, our typical 2 spaces would be required per unit. Almost everyone agreed that design standards were appropriate and that site plan review with the planning board is appropriate. And there we go. On affordable housing, we asked about how much affordable housing should we require in the new district. And surprisingly, actually, most of the responses, a slight majority said, 10% is fine. We can require 10% in the district. The state doesn't require anything special for that. If we want to go up to 15% of the units being affordable in a development, we have to do an economic analysis on whether it's feasible to have that as a requirement. Where our typical requirement now is 15% of the units be affordable. The discussions with the planning board have been that why don't we do the economic feasibility study to see if we can justify the 15%, which I believe we'll be able to. and go for that 15%. And then our default, if not approved, would go down to the 10% that we're allowed to do without any the economic feasibility analysis. Because you see there's an other category there. There were some folks who said, some people said no requirement at all, but there were quite a few who said, let's do more than 15%. So we thought going for the 15 was a good goal. Ground floor commercial uses. So we asked some questions about this because we were looking at Main Street as one of the districts where there's existing commercial. So we asked, is it appropriate to allow for ground floor commercial in the district? And almost everyone agreed that it is. There was a split result on whether we should provide any incentives to get some ground floor commercial. And then just before we put this survey out, EOHLC, which used to be DHCD, the state announced that communities would be able to have a part of their district with a ground floor commercial requirement. So we asked in this survey whether we should take advantage of that allowance to have a ground floor commercial requirement in up to 25% of the unit capacity. The catch is that you're not allowed to have a parking requirement for the commercial uses. So I think the idea is that if you have a mix of commercial and residential, you'll have some offsetting times that you're using those spaces, and they could be shared spaces. And we got a good number of people, 55% of the survey, said that they would support that requirement, even though we can't have a parking requirement for the ground floor commercial. When we asked about locations for a district, first we were affirmed in our focus on existing commercial and existing multifamily areas. So we're avoiding single family neighborhoods. Like I said, half of the district has to be within a half mile of the commuter rail station. So we had options of Main Street or Jefferson Road. So around one of our two train stations. And when we got the results back, it was pretty split between the two, but there were quite a few. So the way the survey was designed, you dragged and dropped and you ranked them. And if you were satisfied with the way that they were shown on your screen, you may not have dragged anything around. So then you skip the question. So when you account for all the skips in there, I think Main Street actually came out on top as the half mile within transit location. And then we asked about other areas outside of the half mile circle, focusing on West Street and 175 Lowell Street, which is actually the Textron, used to be Textron, now the new warehouse site. And then we gave some other options, none, and, would you prefer to have one of the other half mile circle area? And when we asked about this, West Street came out on top. And again, that was the first option. So any skips went towards West Street. So West Street and Main Street turned out to be the most popular options. But we did get some other suggestions through the survey. A bunch of suggestions were for around the Woburn line, trying to take advantage of the Anderson-Woburn station. We ran the half mile circle for Anderson-Woburn, and none of that area, because of the way they map it, none of that area falls in Wilmington. So we wouldn't be able to get anything down there for the half mile requirement. Concord and Fordham, the Cummings properties, that came up as a possibility, but those commercial properties aren't quite big enough to be a complement to an area that's close to the trains. So we'd have to expand into the industrial areas, and it would get very large, and we would have some high taxpayers being potentially displaced in the future. Ballardvale, Andover Street, the areas up there were suggested, but the lower portion of Ballardvale Street where Target is and the office uses are, that's all within the groundwater protection district. So we can't put the district where the groundwater protection district is because we have to avoid special permits. So we kind of looked around that area a bit to see if there was anything that looked better than what we were working with, and we didn't find anything. Deming Way was suggested by a few folks, and actually it was a great suggestion, and you'll see that coming up later in this presentation. There's an area, Wilmington Junction. There's an area in the northern part of town near Crockmall Farm that's sort of landlocked near Tewksbury and the Sutton Brook landfill. That was suggested as a far off place. But when I ran that by some folks in town hall, they said that absolutely we can't even joke about that, that it's not suitable for residential development. So, and then Ames Street came up, the Olin property. Again, I think, probably not the EPA probably wouldn't let us zone that residential. Certainly wouldn't be able to be used for residential. So those were the ideas that sort of came in. There were some others, one person, suggested, the area of town closer to Bill Ricca near their house, things like that. So, but these were the ones that got more than a few mentions that we put on this slide. And all of the survey results, if you want to look through them, are up on our website. So when taking all of the survey results and kind of combing through them, the parameters like the height and the open space and all of that sort of almost fell into place as we thought it would, with 3-story maximum and all of these dimensional requirements being what we thought they would end up being. So we're looking at a draft district that has a 3-story height, 20% open space, setbacks of 20 feet, parking at two spaces per unit, except for within, closer to the commuter rail where we'll go down to 1.5. And then looking to require a 15% affordable housing requirement or a fallback of 10% if we have an issue with getting that approved. And then as far as locations go, what the planning board's talked about is Main Street and West Street seem to be maybe our best choices for this and most appropriate locations for a district. And what we were looking at for Main Street, here's the train station here. This is Church Street. So this is kind of the intersection of Burlington, Church, and Main Street. Metro's down here. We were looking from Metro north on the west side, so on the train station side, up to Sunrise Market, House of Pizza, and up through all the way Meineke, Walgreens, formerly, up to the Hyundai dealership up here. And when we run there's a spreadsheet, kind of a monster spreadsheet that we plug all of this information into, and it spits from the state, and it spits out a unit capacity for us. So when we plug in our 1.5 spaces per unit for this area closer to the train, it spits out a 514 units would be possible there. When we take West Street, which we defined it as the corner here where the 40B development was approved earlier this year for 132 units. There's a single family home here. I'm not sure if it's occupied. I have to look into that a little bit more. And then the storage facility here and Regency Place, which is a built out 40B development. So it's basically 5 parcels that make up that district. And when plugging in the numbers, we get a capacity of 654. So we don't quite with these numbers get to where we need to be at 1248. So that's where the idea of Deming Way came up in discussions with the board. And that parcel is shown here. So if you go, let me get my, there we go. If you go down Burlington Ave, you're going to come to Deming Way. That parcel is within a half mile of the train station. And if we pull that parcel in, that parcel has 218 units, and we get to above where we need to be for our unit count. So it would be sort of this Main Street district, adding Deming Way, and then the same West Street district that I showed in the previous slide. Then we have to talk about the ground floor commercial requirement opportunity. So what they announced was you could require that the ground floor be commercial uses for a portion of your district. So when we've talked about Main Street, we've talked about how we don't want to lose the commercial uses on Main Street. We want to keep it with a commercial feel, with a a pedestrian atmosphere. So we looked at, well, what if we went from the corner right by the train, which is 433 Main Street. That's where I think Big Joe's used to be. And went up Main Street to the Hyundai dealership, which is the 271 Main. The spreadsheet tells us that we get 339 units on that stretch. So we just broke it into each floor. So we have a 3-story build out. So these are the number of units per floor if you built a huge building. But that's the capacity of the units in that area. If we then require ground floor commercial, we're going to lose those first floor units, the 113, and we're left with the 226 on the second and third floor for our unit capacity. So we lose some units, and we have to make those up to get back up to our numbers. So what we talked about is if we look at Deming Way, we applied a 1.5 parking spaces per unit, just like the rest of Main Street, to Deming Way. Currently, they have less than 1 space per unit on that site. And where it's, primarily senior housing, affordable senior housing, you don't have, everyone having a car and not everyone's driving in that development. So we thought, well, if we lower the parking requirement at Deming Way to even 1.25, 1.25 parking spaces per unit as a requirement, the unit capacity goes back up, and we get to, my thing is hiding the number, but we get back up to 245 and add those units back into the count. So if we lower the parking requirement here, just on this one parcel, we'll get back up to where we need to be with our unit count, and we balance the units, the unit capacity in the half mile, which is the Main Street portion, and then outside the half mile would be the other half. And that, going back to this, so this summary, sort of Main Street along this stretch, with the ground floor requirement from the corner of Burlington all the way up to Hyundai, no ground floor requirement for Metro. Deming Way would not have a ground floor requirement, but it would have a little bit lower parking requirement. And then over on West Street, there wouldn't be any ground floor requirement. The parking requirement would be 2 spaces per unit. And that gets us up here to just almost exactly where we need to be for our unit count. So that's the draft idea that the planning board has has so far sort of settled on pursuing. The next steps, they're going to discuss it again at their November meeting and look over some text that I've drafted for sort of the body of the zoning. And we'd like to submit it to the state for a pre-adoption review. They ask for 3 months to take a look at your draft zoning, and it's not to approve it, it's to say this is something that could be approvable. You're on the right track, you know, as you get to town meeting. So we'd like to submit that as soon as possible, because if we submit it in early November, we would get it back early February at the latest. And we have to have it final by mid-February to draft the article for town meeting and advertise that article. So it's but I guess in the meantime there can be changes to it, and we can keep developing it if there are other ideas, but we wanted to get sort of this idea at least to the state to see if are we missing something, are we on the right track, and get the feedback from them. We also, in the meantime, we'll be doing the economic feasibility study for the affordable units. We have a housing consultant that we share with Reading and North Reading, Saugus and Woburn, and they've said that they can do that work for us and try to justify the 15% affordable requirement. So we have sort of a draft now that we would like to meet with groups. That's why we wanted to meet with this committee, get it in front of you, get you thinking about it, get some feedback, maybe hear from you on how you think, what's the best way we can reach other groups and residents in general. So far, we've brainstormed the idea of offering to have a question and answer session with community groups and boards and committees and anyone who wants to talk about it. So would love to hear your feedback, would love to hear your ideas, and just let me know if you have questions.
I have a few. Well, the places that you cited, the 3 different places, West Street, along Main Street, and then Deming Way. Is that, how is that, and this is my ignorance on how these things work, but I mean, isn't that all privately owned land?
It is. So this is the state's requirement, doesn't require us to build anything. It only requires zoning that would allow someone, a private property owner,
Okay.
to build, multifamily housing in the future if they wanted to.
Okay.
So it's kind of like adding an option to what a property owner could do.
Okay. And with Deming Way, what kind of, have you thought about what kind of impact that might have on that community of senior citizens?
So the housing authority could, so I looked into this a little bit, and kind of the question of, well, does the housing authority have to comply with zoning? And they do, unless they get some sort of special approval. But essentially they could potentially build more units on that property for senior housing. They wouldn't have to, and they'd have to find funding to do something like that. But in the short term, I suppose it wouldn't impact them at all. It would just be an option for the housing authority to redevelop it in the future if they wanted to, if they had funding, and add housing to it.
And my last question is, you talked about doing info sessions with the community and so forth. Can the committee just simply state, I know we're not going to, but could you simply go forward and say to the state, we've designated these areas and that's that, or is it required that the community have some input on it?
So this will have to go to, I left this off my slide on the process. This will have to go to town meeting for a vote.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I guess so working up to the town meeting this spring, how can we get this in front of as many people as possible and,
Yeah.
Whether they're going to support it or not, just to know what it is, I guess, to not have it be that they're seeing it for the first time at town meeting. That would be ideal. So we're going to try to see as many people as we can. It's hard though everybody's busy, everybody has a lot going on. So it doesn't work quite as well to invite people to a meeting or invite people to an event. I think what we've brainstormed is that we have to go to them and kind of go to wherever they're gathering, and if we have an opportunity to talk about this.
And I just have one more question. I'm done. What is the Economic Development Committee's role in this, if any, other than being an advisor or, making suggestions? It seems like it's kind of out of, it doesn't fit in our, other than maybe doing the first floor with some businesses, it kind of doesn't fit with our model, I guess. It's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, well, I think there are communities, I know Reading has said this before, there are some places that in areas where you can't get commercial because it just doesn't work. They view multifamily housing as an economic development benefit and strategy. So it even though it's not necessarily all commercial, it is a form of economic development in the sense that you could see it that way, that you're bringing more people to an area to support the commercial that's there and new commercial. So it's a little bit different than what we've talked about, but in itself could be viewed as economic development in bringing activity and more use to a parcel, especially on Main Street where we're going to propose a ground floor commercial requirement. You could get a better pedestrian streetscape with design standards and just an overall better environment with a redevelopment with ground floor commercial and residential above, if you're meeting all the design criteria that are involved in doing that.
Hey, thanks.
Sure.
I have a couple, and they dovetail into what you just said and kind of complement Carol's questions. I guess first and foremost, I think the point that you made, but maybe made it more gently than you ought to, and I think you ought to make it ought to be the first point that gets made before even we get into the presentation, and then make it again at the end, is that this isn't a proposal to do construction. There's no
Right.
There's no development projects in queue right now that fit into this, and we're not asking for one specifically. This is, if I understand it correctly, this is to create zoning that in the future, so the existing parcels, the existing uses, the existing businesses or whatever that live in these zones that you've highlighted for us are grandfathered in. They are there until some future date when someone wants to do something on those parcels. Then and only then would the new zoning come into play. Is that an accurate assessment?
That's right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah.
It's an important point, I think, to make. I
Yeah.
think people will be fearful, like, wait a minute, I live right there. I don't want to get kicked out of my house. And that's not the case here, right? So
right.
I think that's an important observation. The other thing I wanted to ask about or highlight is this notion of it has to go to town meeting for a vote. And I think I heard the select board talking about this the other night, and to their credit, if the attendees, the voters at town meetings say, no, we're not enthusiastic about these changes. So no, go away, planning board, and they vote it down. Well, this is being shoved down our throats by the MBTA. What happens if we, the town, say no, but the MBTA is like, no, we don't care. You need to do something. It seems odd to me that the MBTA says you must do something. Oh, and by the way, get approval by your town. That's a strange dichotomy there. Am I not understanding that correctly?
No, yeah, that's true. And actually the poor MBTA actually it was the legislature that created this requirement. But because it
Yeah,
has MBTA communities in it, I think a lot of frustration is being sent their way. Um,
you'll pardon me if I don't feel too bad about the
yeah,
MBTA.
exactly. Yeah. No, that's fine. No, and actually the planning board members have said this in the meetings that they also do not like, I don't think anyone likes being told that they have to do something when it's typically something that's under your control, right? So zoning is usually a very local thing that we create. And being told that you have to create a zoning district that's this, this, and this is not something that anyone is enjoying. Um, and the planning board members have said so. Their goal was just to figure out what's our best option to put forward. But if town meeting in April says no, we're not going to vote this in. And this, I think it'll be a majority question, a majority vote. Then what we've been advised from council and elsewhere is that we have to try again. So we would bring it to another town meeting for a vote, whether it's the same thing or we amend it, change it a bit. And we don't know exactly what happens if the town keeps saying no. I think that will play out at some point in some places. But for now, I think our goal is just to bring forward something that is our best option. And actually, we tried to focus on areas that either were already multifamily. In West Street's case, two of those big parcels are already multifamily or approved as multifamily. And then focusing on Main Street where we can have the ground floor commercial so we don't lose those and the units above. The goal was to try to get something that is close to maybe something that would have happened without this requirement. That was the hope. But yeah, you're right. No one likes being told to
No, I don't mind it. Frankly, I think you and the planning board or whoever kind of did all this upfront work. In my personal opinion, I'm pretty enthusiastic about it. I think it all kind of makes logical sense, and especially from the context of economic development, I like the Main Street section from Big Joe's down to the Hyundai. And in the future, when I come back to visit my friends here in Wilmington, I look forward to seeing if and how that has taken shape. So that'll be exciting to see. With regards to the how do you get the word out? I agree. If you hold a meeting, you're going to get some people, but not you're not going to get the bandwidth or the visibility out there. So I don't know. I don't have any straight answers other than to say, when there was discussion about the various scenarios or site scenarios for the senior center, the new senior center, as well as the new town hall / school administration building, there were large poster boards that were stationed around the library, I believe, also in town hall, and I don't know, maybe there were some other locations as well. But it's hard to tell this story on a poster board. I think there's a little bit more meat on this bone than there was on the graphics that were pertaining to those other projects. But perhaps that's one way of putting together an informational flyer or something on it, have those big display boards just in high traffic areas around town for folks to engage in, and maybe offer them an opportunity to call in or have a conversation. I don't know. That's the only idea that I had.
I agree with you, Mike, though, if you kind of don't set the stage and you just, if I saw these drawings out, with these yellow lines around things and said, oh my God, without the background story of, it's a mandate and here's why, and has to be, the 50 yards or whatever the heck it is. I mean, it would be kind of terrifying.
You know what I like the idea of? This just popped into my head. I remember when, what was it? You, Valerie, and George Hooper did a video montage thing.
Yeah.
I forget what the project was. Doesn't matter. But yeah, like honest to God, maybe you do a little self-recorded with these slides that you just went over with us. I know you're kind of doing it now live with us, but it's conversational. But if you did a 10-minute presentation highlighting the details and then take that recording and we broadcast it, you broadcast it through various social media channels, etc. That might get some more eyes. Put it on the town's website and draw attention to it.
Someone suggested that there's someone on WCTV who does interviews, and they suggested that maybe that would be a good way to do something on TV. So we're gonna look at all of our options, but this is helpful.
Yeah, so WCTV is a layup. That makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
Any other questions or feedback for us?
A couple of things, Valerie. One, social media. If there's a way, like you said, if you can get a 10-minute blurb like you just did, and a very well done presentation, by the way, and but like I said, if you can do like a 10-minute video on WCTV, have them film it, or even take one of these meetings, either the select board meeting, this meeting, whatever, cut that blurb out and put it on social media. That'll work. And the other thing too is that we need to let the property owners know, because it's affecting their property. So you don't want them to be surprised and say, "What do you mean you're rezoning my property commercial, potentially commercial or residential? And how is that affecting my tax bill?" Which it's not, but they need to know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started that. I reached out to the housing authority, and we had an email exchange, and she said that's great. I guess they were doing that in another town as well. So, but yeah, that's definitely part of the outreach. We'll reach out to property owners. We did the same. We sent out letters when we did the rezoning on Lowell Street a few years back, just to let people know that they could get more information and what was being discussed. And with this being sort of another option on top of what's already available to them, hopefully folks will see it as additional opportunity, and we can kind of explain that you have all your options that already exist, and this would be just another one to add to it.
And lastly, I guess, what are other towns doing to promote or not promote this? You're talking to other planning directors, so there's got to be, other towns are in the same boat of advertising or whatever, however you want to call it.
Yeah, a lot of surveys, a lot of meetings, and I think we'll be kind of brainstorming that together a little bit more as we get our districts sort of composed and have something to talk about that's a little bit more concrete. But a lot of surveys, and yeah, I could see doing sort of a question answer style type of thing that we put online. So yeah, this is helpful. This is good.
And when we get to town meeting, is it, because it's zoning, is it a simple majority or 2/3?
So because this would be for a multifamily district, I think it's going to be a simple majority, but that's one of the questions that I've sent to town council to confirm that. But it should be simple majority.
Thank you.
Valerie, I just had kind of a question. Did the planning board look at, which in my mind, I think the Main Street area is probably pretty close to what it already is in Central Business District? I mean, I know there's some parcels in Central Business District that are not included because it's in groundwater protection, and but the zoning itself, with the commercial on the first floor and the housing on top, and the relaxing the requirement of the parking.
Yeah, it is similar. In the central business district, you actually don't even have to do a commercial ground floor anymore because the zoning was changed a little bit. You could do strictly residential, but there's a little bit of different dimensionals with each variation of the central business district, so it's a little bit more situation based, and the density doesn't, for strictly residential, doesn't go up to, I don't think, 15 per acre. So it's a little bit denser, but essentially you're going to see that same build out as you see at, Church on Church Street in this type of district, because yeah, it's very similar.
Mhm. That was my
Yeah.
only comment, which I mean, I feel much happier with the commercial component, which was, as you know, and I'll continue to voice it, losing residential to, losing commercial to residential. We have very little commercial retail in the town of Wilmington. We shouldn't be losing any of it. We should look at ways to increase it, if anything. So, so I do like this plan better. And can I ask a question also? What happened with Lowell Street? How was that ended up being eliminated?
The old Textron parcel.
Mhm.
So, I think it was, well, first, it wasn't as popular in the survey.
Mhm.
It also, at least half of it, over half of it is in the groundwater protection district. So there's enough of the parcel that is not in the groundwater protection district to make up the required number of units.
Mhm.
But because we'd have to include the whole parcel, because that's the way the state system works, the spreadsheet, we'd actually get a lot more units, potential for a lot more units on that parcel because it's so big. And so I think there was some hesitation on whether that's really where we would want a large number of units. And the focus went to, I think the board was like, well, West Street already has multifamily, so there wouldn't be a lot of change there. And it's closer to the highway. So it was, it wasn't, there was discussion about it, but I think up until the survey, they were both kind of neck and neck, and then the survey just kind of took West Street over the top.
Okay, that's really good to know. I mean, the thought process is important, so, that's my comments. Like I said, I think this is probably the best case scenario that the town can do and come up with, so, I mean, and I think your presentation, even here tonight, I think just cutting it out of this recording would be a really good way to educate people.
It's
I
a
don't
good
think
idea.
you have to do much more work than that. I would just take this video and cut it,
That is true. We are recording, so we could do that.
Yep,
Good idea.
thank you.
Anyone else? We could talk about this all night.
So,
Well, if you have any thoughts, I love zoning, which I know that's weird, but and trying to problem solve like this. So if you have ideas, thoughts, feel free to reach out. And if you have a eureka moment where you're thinking about how we can reach folks, please don't hesitate to let us know your thoughts. So with that, I will stop sharing that, and we can go back to the agenda for back to Jane for an update on the facade improvement grant program.
So for the first round of grants, we received 12 applications and 7 were awarded grants. And 2 of those 7 have had some complications with their contract. So we're still kind of taking in contracts fully executed. I think we have, what do we say? I think we only have one fully executed contract right now. So we're still kind of looking for those.
What does that mean, Jane, a fully executed contract? What do you mean by that?
So Val might be able to explain this better.
Sure, I can jump in. So, when the awards, so an award letter goes out saying, congratulations, you were picked for a facade grant. There's a contract that they enter into with the town. And so until, so that contract kind of spells out how it's going to work. And until we get the contract back and everything's kind of signed and everything, we haven't wanted to announce the awards because, and I think I can just say this because I don't know why I couldn't, but
Hey, Valerie, can I interrupt you real quick? Do I need to get off of this call right now? I think because you've already made
No.
awards, I think
don't-
I'm cut.
yeah,
Right.
right. I think you're all right, Frank.
Okay,
But
you
it's
tell
up
them
to
why I
you.
say-
Yeah, so right, so Frank's asking that because West Real Estate, and I think I got that right. I always want to say West Realty. They applied for a grant and received a grant, and we do have that award contract finalized for a sign and a new window and some new pavers out front. The rest of them, there was one, Pacific Grove was picked for an award for painting and cleaning the storefront. John Lucci went ahead with that work before any award or contract just because he wanted to do it, and he said, it doesn't matter about the grant. I'm just going to do this. So we haven't kind of come out with a press release about awards yet because everything's still sort of up in the air until we get the contracts back signed. And then we can kind of make an announcement about that. But I think what Jane's going to talk about is that we did not use all of our allocated funds, and therefore there will be a round 2. Right, Jane?
Yes, that's right. So the second round of the grant program has been announced. I think it was the beginning of this month. So we have about half of the funds left over that we can award to businesses. We did make a change in the requirement section, and all of the application guidelines is on our on the Economic Development Committee website, so that can be found on there for round 2. But we changed a requirement so that applicants have to come in and review their project idea with Valerie and I, because there was some misinterpretation of what exactly was storefront improvement. For example, we got an application for paving a parking lot that we didn't really consider the improvement to the actual storefront. So that's kind of a bigger change that we made to the second round. What else do I have here?
Jane, what's the timeline for that second round?
I did pull up the guidelines. So the deadline to submit is December 15th at 4:30 p.m. And then the awards will be in January of 2024.
And just out of curiosity, have we received any yet with this Part 2 program?
So a couple people have reached out to meet with Valerie and I. We actually have 2 meetings tomorrow. But I sent out the application to some of the people who weren't awarded a grant in the first round, so that they have the opportunity to apply again and just some various people had called after, you know, the awards went out and they kind of heard the news. So I did inform people who made inquiries about that second round. So
But
May
Pat,
I
we haven't gotten any completed applications yet.
mhm.
Okay.
what other mechanisms did you use to put the word out?
We did like social media posts. I know that Suzanne and Carol and Rob went around to businesses to let them know that there's a program. Rob visited a lot of businesses.
Thanks, Rob.
So there was that, and then I think that was the biggest part. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, we did social media posts, and we're gonna do that again. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with everybody in your network,
Mhm.
that would be great.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of going with it. I don't remember seeing a post. I'm sure I just didn't catch it. But yeah, when you do, if you want to, when you do that, maybe just send out a message to the committee to say, hey, we've just posted this out on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, wherever you're using. And then those of us that have those platforms can go look for it and relay it to our networks. I gladly will. I just didn't, I didn't see it.
I think all we did so far was a press release. I'm not sure if anything was posted to our social media
Okay.
yet.
Yeah. And Jane, one of the things, and I just wrote this to Valerie because I thought of it after, but one of the things we use on the Commission on Disabilities that works really well for the lower tech population is flyers at the high traffic areas. I usually have gone around putting them at grocery stores, senior centers, pharmacies. And we do get quite a bit of action or notoriety on that when we utilize those. And we've used them like a half a dozen times now. And to be honest, between that and the internet, we've gotten more hits from the flyers. And we also have put them in the newsletter. We put a flyer in the newsletter once, and then also had an item on the newsletter. So I don't know if you've considered those avenues.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And I'm happy to bring the flyers around, or, you know, if you just give me a call and I'll show you what we've done on the other boards, and I'm happy to go around during the day and drop them off again.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
No problem.
I would suggest